else admit to us that you're not a man, you're a worm. You know, this revolution is filled with so many ironies, really. First, you tell us that it is manly to keep your word. All right? If you are a man, you keep your word. And now all that the black people in this country are demanding, and even the black people in the whole world are demanding, is that you keep your word. You told us we were free. Well, then show us that we're free. You told us that there is justice, equality for all in this country. Well, then stick to your word and let us see the justice and equality for all. Or else admit to us that you're not a man, you're a worm, you're afraid of us, you're afraid to give us equal stand. You're afraid that if you give us equal ground, that we will match you and we will override you. And if that's what you're afraid of us, then tell us that just what you're afraid of. But don't keep hiding it from us and holding this up to us. And every time we ask you for something, you give us a little bit of something. And it's all tokenism. We don't want tokenism. And there are most black men in this world that don't want charity. And yet still every time we ask you for something, you give us a little piece, a little piece. You're playing games with us. We're not children. We're big men. I've seen my father have to put up with all kinds of stuff. He was a big man. He raised a family. He went down south. And he had to go around to the back door with his wife. We're not asking for anything. We're not asking for any favors. All we want is what's ours. Now, there are many black veterans who are coming back, and they're mad. They're angry. Do you think that they're going to sit down through this? Our fathers didn't have the knowledge that we had. They sat through it. But there are other black youth that are not going to sit through it. We know about Che. We know about Fanon. We've read the books of our revolution. We've listened to Mao and his quotations. We know where we stand. We're not going to sit for it. We're asking, and if we ask and we don't get, we're prepared to stand up and take it. If I ask a man, I tell a man I am hungry. I tell him I am cold.
Hello, my friends. Hello, my family. We are back. We are back once again. Welcome. Revolutionary Blackout Thursday afternoon live. We got a lot of great content for you guys. How you guys doing? I see you guys in the chat. Much love to my comrade Zoya. How you doing, my friend? How you guys doing in the chat? We got a great show for you today. We got great guests. I see you in the back, Aaron. Give me a thumbs up when you are ready. I apologize I couldn't go live yesterday. I'm still battling internet issues of the such. So hopefully we can get through this live. But I think everything's good now. I think I got everything fixed. So I appreciate you guys. CJ held it down yesterday. We got a lot to discuss. Obviously, you guys see the thumbnail, the main title of the video. Biden once again giving more aid to Ukraine, while we get crumbs for student loan debt relief. And let me just say this real quick before I bring my guests in. Do not thank the guy who created the student loan debt crisis for doing a half measure that is 100% designed to kill the student debt movement. This is supposed to be the legislation. Now people are supposed to forget about it. It's the same with the climate bill. Like it sometimes when you have these half measures, you have the establishment that throw that out there to kill the revolutionary spirit and demanding what we should have, and that's canceling all student debt. Think about what kind of fraudulent society that we live in. And this is why I'm an unapologetic anti-capitalist. Think about how dumb your central planning is. How does it make sense to take your most powerful, most reliable spending base? These are the people fresh out of college, young. They are in love. They're about to buy a home. They are going to be in the market. They are in the prime demo, 25 to 55. How is it a smart idea for a society to put your most powerful, reliable spending block into poverty? It doesn't make sense. I view everything as a class war. This is a class war that was waged by the capitalists to punish anyone from the working class who had the audacity to gain an education, who might think outside the box and question their narratives. This was in direct response when Reagan cracked down on California to tuition, and he kickstarted the student loan debt crisis. He did it in response to left activists that was calling out the CIA, calling out his trickle-down economics. It started out as a class war by the capitalists to keep the workers as dumb worker ants. And then the white-collar workers who then graduate from college, they can keep them in line. They keep the workers who make a lot of money, who are educated. You stay in debt. You stay in line. Don't think about leaving our system. Don't you guys see the class warfare of this as well? Sorry, Aaron, I'm gonna get you in there. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready. I got a lot to say about this. I think you do as well. I'm gonna introduce my guest. We got author and historian Aaron Good. Thank you for joining us. He joined us on the Anti-Imperialist Summit. We did a history of the CIA panel. He also the host of the American Exception podcast. Welcome to Revolutionary Blackout once again, Aaron. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, great to be here.
So we're gonna talk about foreign policy. I love your takes on foreign policy, but especially considering what's in the news, I definitely want to get your take on student debt. I'm just begging. I'm begging capitalists to understand how markets work. They're the one who thinks socialists. We don't understand how markets work. They don't understand how commerce works. As I said, how does it make sense to take your most powerful spending block and put them in debt? Student loan debt cancellation would help the economy. Why is that? Because if you free up debt, feel free to chime in anytime you want, because I've been watching. I was on the sideline yesterday. I lied to say, but do you want to chime in before I go off?
Well, these things are related, is what I would say. We're talking about U.S. foreign policy, and you're talking about debt cancellation. And you're saying, why would they do this when it doesn't make sense according to any rational understanding of the way a market economy would work? That you would want to have people who can consume the products that are made by the system, and yet they don't do that. So the question is, are they stupid, or are they aware of what they're doing?
They know what they're doing.
And they know what they are doing. I think that this traces back to, I would say, the 1970s and the aftermath of 1968, which was a potentially revolutionary or seriously reformist year in the U.S. And had democracy and politics been allowed to unfold without intervention from on high, you may have had the U.S. move in a much more anti-imperialist, economically progressive direction. But in April, they murder Martin Luther King, and then a couple months later, they murder Robert Kennedy. And MLK and Robert Kennedy were moving in similar directions. When you look back at where they were both. I mean, MLK is talking about the evil triplets of economic exploitation, militarism, and racism, right? And then Robert Kennedy is running on a platform of economic justice, peace, and racial justice. So they were very similarly aligned, and far to the left of Bernie Sanders, really, today. And MLK was getting ready to put the People's March onto Washington to ask for them to stop spending so much money on war and spend money to solve social problems that needed solving.
Am I right when I say that is what really pissed the establishment off on MLK? Like, the marching and all that stuff was inconvenient to maintaining social order. It's when he spoke out against militarism, when he started building class consciousness. Am I accurate to say that, Eric?
Yeah, and when he realized that just getting rid of Jim Crow was not solving the problems in the U.S. For the society in general and for Black people also, and then he realized that in 1968, it was the Poor People's March. It wasn't the march for reparations or something narrow like that. It was a way to say, like, we need to have a just society for everyone. And if you do that, it's going to help the people at the bottom more. And sure, if you get down to it, these are disproportionately minority figures. But if you just create a society where people cannot be so exploited and you stop spending so much money on war, this will be a way to solve some problems. And this is, his family believes, that's why he was killed. Coretta Scott King was always believed he was killed by the state. There was a civil trial that she was a part of in the 1990s And then after the civil trial found that there was a plot involving the federal government to kill Martin Luther King, she asked Bill Clinton to reopen the case, and Bill Clinton would not, even though he couldn't have had anything to do with it. So this was it was a counter-revolutionary moment in 1968, and the result was, I believe, in the 70s, a move towards reorienting America away from like the liberalism of the New Deal and post-war era and towards neoliberalism. And a part of this was intentional to make it so that, because a lot of the people protesting the Vietnam War and that were out in the streets were like middle-class kids who were not the poorest. They weren't the poor people, rising up, who were starving and then trying to overthrow the system. These were like reasonably well-off people who were sick of the system. Right. And I believe that the establishment concluded that the economic prosperity of the New Deal era and the post-war era had created these democratic elements where it was threatening to the establishment and threatening the government or to the top-down governance. And so they write about this pretty explicitly in the Trilateral Commission documents and in the Powell Memorandum. Powell went on to become a Supreme Court justice, and that seems more like a right-wing, statement. And the Trilateral Commission pretty much takes over the Democratic Party. You get rid of these sort of Kennedy type and other type of liberals, and you end up with Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, Walter Mondale, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, all of these high finance people that are, just full on capitalists, not liberals. I mean, Nixon, like Noam Chomsky says, Nixon was the last liberal president. And if you stop and look at it, as crazy as that sounds, it's after Nixon, you get both parties move to the right. The next Democrat.
Did he create the EPA? Like he created, right?
Yeah. Created the EPA, boosted Social Security payments, all sorts of things.
Yeah, no love for Nixon, but he'd be to the left of every single president we had since then.
Yeah,
that's just a fact. That's just an uncomfortable fact.
Yeah,
and whenever you hear conservatives talk about MLK, it's literally it is so cringeworthy. It makes me want to vomit because they always whitewash him and pretend that he's something that he was not. And they in white America, the same people who hate black radical revolutionaries now and socialists now, the same people who attack anti-imperialists, people who attack tankies, they're the same people who would hate MLK if they were alive back then.
For sure. He was hated at the time by much of the establishment at the time of his death. He was beloved to some degree by the liberal establishment when they were pushing for civil rights for very specific reasons, because Jim Crow after the Civil War was a very bad look for the United States, because really the focus of the Cold War was really about neocolonialism. And so these countries of people who are not white, they looked at America and they saw Jim Crow. They saw the Union Robeson thing, the We Charge Genocide, and it was a bad look. And so the establishment was for civil rights to a large degree. Just they didn't want to go beyond that.
The Soviet Union, they used to do anti-racist propaganda just to make the United States look bad. So that's a good point, because that's also kind of what you see going on right now with the United States. They met with Saudi Arabia. One of the things they were trying to say was, hey, you guys got to clean up your act, because we can't be begging you guys for oil while we condemning Russia for their human rights violations. And we all saw Saudi Arabia's response to that. MBS's response was like, no, F off. We kind of do whatever we want. But that's the message that they had. And that was the strategy then, was to pretend that their society was better than something than what it is. And there's still Western chauvinists that still believe in it. And
that might be why they chopped up Khashoggi too, by the way. The CIA may have been grooming him for some sort of bigger role potentially if the Saudis were too odious. And it might not just be that the Saudis weren't going to reform. It's probably more that the Saudis were more tilting towards China and Russia, or trying to go between them. And then this Khashoggi guy was perceived as like part of a Western, bloc, and he was writing bad things about them in the Washington Post and elsewhere, or ghostwriting them. Maybe it was other spooks that actually wrote it. But so they ended up, chopping them up, and then the U.S. can't even really do anything about it, except maybe wag a finger, but that's it.
Yeah, well said. I wanna share this study, because I want to explain. I mean, this is a very simple concept. Let me pull this up. I'm once again begging capitalists to become serious about how markets work, how to plan a centralized economy in a actual smart, intelligent way. Capitalists, they only care about enriching themselves and their social circle. Student debt and putting the working class and your spending base in debt is just a horrific idea, because we have people who are not having kids. You have Elon Musk, who are constantly crying about the population rate. You seen that, Aaron? Like him and a lot of billionaires and all these capitalists, they know they need more low wage workers. They're like, oh my God, look at the low birth rate. The low birth rate is because our generation did not have the opportunity that our parents did. Even I remember I was talking to this guy on the General Strike Summit. He had a job at a factory, and he was able to raise his kids till they was grown up. 3 kids and his wife, just one breadwinner. Then his son followed in his footsteps and got his same factory job, and he literally still living with his parents, same job, can't do what his parent did.
Yeah. No, this has changed. There was a golden age relative to the other ages in the U.S. where you could be not a person with a college degree, but you could have a good union job and you could buy a house and send your kids to college and have a decent life. Because I believe because of these ideas in the 70s and the fact that they were really frightened of the potential of moving in a leftward direction, and the need to maintain the empire, the need to maintain a certain kind of political economy at home in order to demobilize the population, to keep them in a state of insecurity so that they are not able to politically mobilize to democratically take over control of the state. And so people can't participate in politics. People don't have the wherewithal to become very educated, to become active. They're all very scared about losing their jobs. They have to hold on to their jobs to have health care. Earlier in the Cold War, they had the debates where Nixon would brag to Khrushchev, the kitchen debates about how the American standards of living were so high. But after the 1970s, this really changes, and it was done on purpose. They really want to. And they don't stop with it. They're never satisfied. They actually want to turn every part of society into an avenue for rent extraction and for consigning people to debt peonage. Like that, they want to make schools basically like the military-industrial complex, like for-profit, corporate charter schools that run educations to democratically elected public education boards. And they want to privatize the post office. They want everything to be just a vehicle for sucking money into the blob of capital that rules us. And it's quite clear what they're doing, and it's oligarchy. It's horrendous, and the empire's falling apart, and their own schemes to run the economy this way are also collapsing in Europe and the U.S. And you got to wonder what they're going to replace it with, because it can't stay this way.
Yeah, this is why I don't understand bourgeoisie, upper class bootlickers, like the celebrity worshipers, the people who stand celebrities, the people who stand politicians, who stand AOC, who love
the K-Hive's pretty cool.
I mean, all around, like the people who like Marjorie Taylor Greene, the people who like Donald Trump, those people make my skin crawl. Like, do you guys not understand what's going on right now? There is a class war that they are waging against us. But you stand Donald Trump? You like Joe Biden? You like Kamala Harris? You liking celebrities who endorse, like celebrities who are like, oh, I'm endorsing Hillary Clinton. We're gonna do a fundraiser. We gotta vote blue, vote or die. And you guys don't think they know what they know exactly what they're doing. They know they voting and supporting neoliberals because that's representing their class interests. Can we stop giving these people benefit of the doubt? And now these same people are playing dumb. And I saw you comment on this article. I'm gonna see if I can pull this up real quick. You have capitalists writing up stories like this, and I saw this because you flagged it, where they're saying student loan debt forgiveness is now left-wing trickle-down economics. And these people are so bad faith because these people are saying, oh, well, if you cancel student loan debt, that is going to be a regressive policy that only helps the rich, ignoring the fact that the people that held the most amount of student loan debt is Black women, and rich families are not taking out student loan debt. Yes, someone may become a lawyer and doctor, and they may climb the social circle by becoming educated. But that's what we want. That's literally someone's climbing social mobility. They was poor, they became a doctor, thus they took on student loan debt. Now they're not even upper class no more because now they living paycheck to paycheck because it's student debt. It's a class war. But Aaron, do you want to comment on this? Because let's see if Newsweek will let me in. This is what there have been so many bad arguments that have been driving me crazy, and this is one of them.
Well, also just how what's really another insidious aspect of it, just besides the economic illiteracy that comes through in it, which I think is on purpose. I think it's a contrived thing, is just the optics of it. It's Newsweek, which is, corporate oligarchy owned for billionaires, basically. And they find one black man who's a union railroad worker. So it's like the optics of it are to make you think that like this is somehow an authentic working class, Black Lives Matter kind of a branding in some sort of way. I mean, I know like people could have any opinion on across the spectrum, across race, ethnicity, yada, yada. But like this is the kind of propaganda that you know that this is not like just happenstance.
Yeah. Think about how this makes sense, guys. They say canceling student loan debt will only help the upper class and the rich. But only the upper class and the rich seem to dislike the idea of canceling student loan debt.
Well, there's what you could call the petty bourgeois has also some not so enlightened attitudes about these things as well. I mean, there's a swath of the population, but it's not that big. That has this whole full-on Horatio Alger mentality that is there too. But when it comes down to it, who are the people that really are against this? And it's not by and large working class people. This is a totally fake kind of a thing.
This is what they also say. The people who pretend they are progressive, but then they will pontificate against it. They'll say, well, if just canceling student loan debt is not going to do anything to change the cost of education. You pretty much just screwing the new students. You had colleges that are going to raise tuition rates. I literally saw this right-wing reporter say that. I was watching the press conference with the Biden press secretary, and this reporter, right-winger, I don't care if she's Democrat or Republican, she was a right-winger. She was like, well, wouldn't you cancel on student loan debt, increase tuition rates? You guys know what the obvious answer to that? Make public colleges free.
Man, and manage some of these universities and make them fire about half of their administration, if not more, who are mostly people who are like doing some kind of make work in some ways. I mean, it's the administrative overhead. They basically, and the trend is in recent years to hire way less tenured faculty, to have adjuncts who are making about the same as the people that do maintenance and stuff almost, and who I think should be paid more too. That's not to disparage those groups, but it's just like it's the people. It's such a move away from like the intellectual mission and more to this kind of corporate, super top down, top heavy administrative bureaucracy. It's crushing students with debt, among other things.
I'm asking you guys how this makes sense as a central philosophy on how to manage. I explained these concepts to you guys before. Whether you know it or not, there will always be people in charge of production. How they choose winners, right? Our government right now, they choose the winners of the military-industrial complex on Wall Street, and that's the same way they forgive Paycheck Protection Program loans. That's them choosing winners. So what we advocate for on RBN, we want a dictatorship of the proletariat, so we win. You know how it is right now. The House always wins. The House is the capitalist. We want a system where the proletariat always wins. What they do right now is they got this system where they put people in debt who could otherwise contribute to the economy. That's the concept that I'm just summing up the article here. What many studies have said and why many people advocate for this idea. But if you talk to a right winger, they just don't care. When you talk to a capitalist, they don't care how well the society is running. They just want to impose their morality like some sort of feckless authoritarian. They claim they're anti-authoritarian, but they say, well, you can't do this thing that will help people. You can't do this thing that will be a class war that will benefit the workers. You can't do this thing that will make our society much more well-ran oil machine, because that would be unfair to the people who already paid their debt. Oh, if you took out a debt, you should pay it back, no questions asked. You signed a lot, you signed the contract, so pay it back. They don't care about what the ills and what this calls against our society. It is them pushing their bullshit capitalist moralist agenda that literally hurting workers, that benefiting who? Who benefits from this?
The people, I think that the people that are running things benefit from the general overall precarity. You do have the various rackets, okay, of things. With the student loan debt thing, most of it's owned by the federal government, as I understand it. I'm going to admit right now to not being a super well versed in the particulars of the student loan situation, but I do understand that most of this is owned by the government, and it can be erased just like they do QE or do other things with the Federal Reserve. It's not something you have to tax people on, first of all. And that is where the Newsweek article is just essentially lying. It's saying that like the taxpayers are covering this. That's not true. And the Biden administration, as I understand it, not watching a lot of mainstream news sources, but the Biden administration has not really been educating the public on the actual nature of the debt. If you do that, if you actually explain more of how banking and finance work, which is key to this whole discussion, then the arguments for debt cancellation for for education, student loans is inarguable. And additionally, it extends to other forms of debt too, like medical debt and mortgage debt. Why Obama did not help underwater owners when you could have erased the debt easily. Instead, they opted to just save the banks and kick lots of people out of their homes. You really could have done both, but they didn't do that. And the more you understand these, the way that these things are structured, the more it just makes you shake your head in disgust, because there's just no reason to have this kind of debt overhead that is, really stultifying your whole society. You could erase all medical debt. You could erase all student loan debt. You could write down mortgage debts if they're underwater. You could do all sorts of things. It's just, these are not, they don't want to get, I think they don't even want people to understand debt anyway, because the idea that debt is sacrosanct and sacred, that this is a major pillar of the ideological political order that they want to maintain. And if people realize how much the student loan debt is just bullshit, then they will understand that the other debt issues are bullshit as well. We're starting to see this internationally. China just forgave a whole lot of loans. And in that case, they actually did have to extend these loans to countries, and they're canceling debts. I mean, this is like, it's starting to change. And I think the ground is shifting under the feet of the people that run this empire. And as people start to become aware of these things, as consciousness sort of grows about these, I think it may be more challenging for them to keep a lid on this stuff.
Well said, well said. And that's such a great point. They can't give any victory to the workers, because there's people that make so many dumb excuses. And once again, I don't care about, I don't want to get into some sort of moral debate. I just care about what works best for society. Like what will increase the quality of life for the most people, period. If canceling student loan debt will bankrupt the society, then you can make an argument to me based on facts that will present your case, but that is not the case. That is not what it is. But it's an active, coordinated effort on the capitalist class, and this is why I want you guys to view it as class war. This is why we got to be militant. Don't think Joe Biden who created this crisis. We should be planning student loan debt strikes when they start the student loan debt program. That I think it started out at the end of December, if I read it right. But I want to show you guys this, because they are saying the quiet part out loud. This is why they are relying on keeping people in debt, and this is why Biden didn't cancel all the student loan debt, and this is why Biden shouldn't necessarily be praised for this, because what he did essentially erase the point of what we just went over in terms of boosting the economy, because you still got a large amount of people in debt. So you're not getting that large amount of spending benefit you would get if you just cancel it all. But also another reason they don't want to do this, because they need their foot soldiers. They need, Jim Banks. These people are saying the quiet part out loud. That's the funny part. Jim Banks has proved something that anti-imperialists have been saying for quite some time now. He says student loan forgiveness undermines one of our military's greatest recruitment tools. Now, my revolutionary blackout brother JB, he covered this. Did a great segment talking about how military recruitment is down for a lot of great and interesting reasons. And imagine if they cancel student loan debt and then make public colleges tuition free. That shit is done. That shit is done. You have any thoughts, Aaron, before I move on?
I mean, the military does rely on this, and you have to. I mean, where is the U.S. fighting any wars where we need soldiers anyway? The U.S., the shoreline of the U.S. is pretty much a natural fortress with two oceans, and then Mexico below and Canada above, and Cuba. But none of those places are going to invade the United States. So what's up with the 800 military bases? And when are we thinking we're going to need a whole lot of cannon fodder anyway? I mean, we're not going to. Our rivals are nuclear armed powers, and we don't really need these soldiers. The U.S. is just still clinging to this imperial mindset, and it makes no sense whatsoever. If the furthest it can be pursued is just going to kill everybody on the planet, and so it's obvious that they should be changing this. It goes back to the end of World War II and the decision to go for global empire instead of a sort of internationalism like Henry Wallace was suggesting. They went instead for this Council on Foreign Relations, Time Life, Henry Luce, American Century, which is just American empire. And if you look back at the sort of suppressed history, you see that they recruited a lot of Nazis and Japanese war criminals and Italian fascists and so on, so that they can run this clandestine netherworld to sort of manage the world on behalf of this capitalist empire. And we took the exact wrong choice, and it's kind of criminalized the American state at the highest levels. And it's created a fictitious world of conflict and empire where the U.S. is always under attack and fighting the good fight around the world, when it's really just empire like every other empire. And you don't build the world's biggest army or the world's biggest empire of military bases by accident. Around the world. This is because you want to control the world, and we have to start recognizing this as the imperial reality, and how much it's killed what democracy there was in America. Although there's still embers burning because people want something better, and I'm hoping more people start to realize that these things are related: the empire and the exploitative neoliberal regime that rules us at home in such absurd ways with this student loan debt and medical bills and homelessness, all these problems that could be easily solved. If we could solve these problems, mobilize human resources to overcome the real crises that are threatening us, like global warming, that we really do need to mobilize for, but we can't, because the empire wants to maintain its hegemony over U.S. and international society to the extent possible for as long as it can, and that's just what empires do, and we got to recognize that.
When you say our empire and our quest for global domination, full spectrum dominance, that is a threat to democracy, that is not an understatement. I'm asking you guys this question: if I wanted to vote to end us spending $60 billion in Ukraine aid, who's my option? Who's my option in our two-party duopoly? If I want to end the two-party strategy to wage war against China, this new Cold War against China, who's my options on the balance, Aaron? Well, we know we support third parties, but you guys see how there's this dictatorship of the U.S. empire that has captured our democracy, and that's why people look. There's some progressives who are upset at me when I say hard no to Fetterman, because I look at foreign policy as the litmus test. Because if you're caving to the U.S. empire, that is a sign that you're going to cave on a lot of issues. That's a sign that you want to work for the people that we should be challenging, because they are fighting and stripping our rights and taking away our democracy through their action. And one thing this is kind of on the same topic, but slightly kind of shifting. We want to talk about how, because you write about this, you talk about this a lot, how the United States used debt as a tool of geopolitical dominance. Here's the story that we cover, and you can also speak on this as well. If China forgiving loans, sorry, I get through the ads here. We did a segment on this on RBN Live. My brother JB also did great coverage on this. You guys need to subscribe to the channel, by the way. China to waive some African loans, offer $10 billion in IMF funds, and this is in contrast to the United States, NATO, the IMF, constantly bankrupting African countries. So do you want? I'll just pass to you to discuss how U.S. used debt to their geopolitical advantage? And you also can comment on the story if you want, Aaron, because I know you do a lot of good work on this.
Well, the debt issue is something that has always been used to as a kind of as a form of economic domination in the U.S. Especially in the early parts of the 20th century with so-called dollar diplomacy and these banana wars in Central America, put countries into debt, and the banana companies were very powerful there, and they would use this debt to subjugate and keep these countries very poor on purpose. Basically, so that the whole surplus of their economy would be taken up, for debt service to pay off creditors. So they couldn't really build any kind of state capacity. You can't build any kind of like functional democracy in any way, and you can't mess with the dominance of corporate capital, especially fruit companies at that time. So this goes back a long way. That Haiti was saddled with all this debt after they had that revolution to kick out the French.
They was forced to pay. Do you know the exact number? But they paid back an insane amount of money to France for overthrowing.
Try to figure it out.
Sorry, go ahead, Aaron. Go ahead.
We did this to China with the Boxer Rebellion settlement, or the Opium Wars too. We put them in debt and forced them to pay some big indemnity. I say we, I don't mean that was like the British, whatever. We globo whiteness, which is, I don't wave that flag, but like whatever, that we put the U.S. the Anglo world, and the U.S. was involved in the opium traffic, but not so much the Opium Wars. First one with the British, and then with the French, the second one, and then the Boxer Rebellion really was like a thug buddy coalition of white imperialist European powers against the Chinese, and they forced them to pay for the West coming over to their country and putting down this rebellion against Western domination and economic exploitation. And when you look at what the Chinese actually had to pay before they finally canceled it, like 40 years later, it was like $1 trillion worth of gold that they paid in debt after a war that the Western powers fought there, because the Chinese were trying to kick them out, more or less. That's what the Boxer Rebellion was about. So this is an ongoing thing, and it's been a way that capitalism has always operated. In the 1970s is when it gets really, it's obscure what they did. Most people don't realize what happened in the 1970s, but after World War II, the U.S. has the gold standard, to a kind of a gold standard where you can trade your surplus dollars for gold, $35 an ounce of gold, right? But the U.S. spends so much money in the Vietnam War and in the military in the years leading up to that, but especially with the Vietnam War. Only John Kennedy tried to bring that under control and actually brought the U.S. into gold surplus for a small time before he was killed, which was quite a feat. And that was one of the reasons why he was able to refuse sending troops into Vietnam when he was president. He cited the dollar issue and the gold losses, right? But then Johnson comes in, destroys the Bretton Woods system because the U.S. cannot possibly pay all of the outstanding debts it has, too much war spending. And so they go to this other system where they're like, well, we're going to negotiate this a little bit. We're going to figure out what to do with these dollars. We're not going to give you gold. Maybe we'll do this. Maybe we'll do that. But it was really like a delaying strategy by the Nixon administration as they orchestrated events to lead up to the oil crises of the 1970s. And that solved the problem of the dollar. Because now, while they're negotiating this and trying to figure something else out, all of a sudden oil quadruples in price, and all of those dollars that these other countries had accumulated go to major oil producing nations, which were U.S. puppet states in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, right? And so these countries then take all their dollars, and there were debates over what they should do with this. Should it go into some sort of international account or something? But the U.S. has enough power to say, like, no, those petrodollars are going to go into the Western financial system, into U.S. banks. And then those funds are loaned out to the third world, so that the third world to like loans to say, like, okay, here's the loan. The interest rate might change, but here it is. You can build whatever infrastructure you like to help develop your country because we got the money. We can afford to loan you this money. And eventually the U.S. raises interest rates drastically. And this leads to the third world debt crisis, okay, the Volcker Shock. This was all part of this massive scheme, really, to shore up the U.S. dominance after the fall of Bretton Woods. And so after Vietnam and after these oil shocks and these things that seem like, oh, the economy's not doing so well, but it all redounded to the benefit of the corporate elite in America. And when all was said and done, the third world was in a whole lot of debt. the Western financial system and the oil companies had more money than was imaginable, and the U.S. had the ability to print dollars that the rest of the world was going to accept, because after that, the Treasury bill, and around this time, the U.S. Treasury bill comes to replace gold. And so if the U.S. spends a bunch of money, if U.S. banks and financial centers buy up the commanding heights of other countries, and these countries get a lot of dollars in their central bank because of that, then the U.S. just says, well, we'll give you Treasury bills, which is just like an IOU. And what this means is that, and the countries hold these dollars because it helps to stabilize their currency in the dollar denominated, international market. And what this means for the U.S. is that they can create as much money as they want to run huge budget deficits. It really finally achieves this form under Reagan, and that's where we've been ever since. Budget deficits every year that are huge, and yet Americans don't understand the actual nature of the system, because they could easily ask, like, well, wait, why don't we just run these budget deficits for healthcare for everybody, for education, for housing? And they don't. But those countries that are poor and in debt, they have to find ways to raise money to pay off the debt. And that takes up the whole surplus of the economy. And that's why you haven't really had any growth and advancement in the global South or third world or formerly colonized nations for the last 40 years, because the U.S. system, the system that the U.S. presides over, is organized specifically to suck the entire surplus of these countries' economies into the Western financial system, and so by design, so that they can't ever advance and other people make a lot of money.
There's so much historical context that you add. That's why it's good to have you on, especially for this discussion. And this is why I talk about foreign policy all the time. And I tell you guys, looking at the U.S. policy and how they act in terms of the U.S. empire and U.S. imperialism is a great way to see how they're going to treat their civilians back at home. A lot of times they almost beta test tactics on colonized people that we are at the time exploiting. You see how they use debt trap diplomacy. The same thing they project onto China, even though we saw how China forgives debt. You see how they weaponize that against us?
Yeah, well, and to clarify this, when you get the debt crises and everything else, that's the era of the IMF structural adjustments. And so these countries get into crises because they have too much debt. And then the IMF says, well, you're going to need to do this. You're going to need to privatize your resources, lower your labor standards, et cetera, et cetera. And the result is that it really wrecks the economy. And the IMF just can get a pound of flesh here to make sure that these bondholders get paid. But it also makes for a fire sale of whatever the nation's assets are. And the Chinese have never done this. The Chinese have never done any sort of IMF-style looting of a country, to my knowledge. Usually whatever things get cited in The Economist or the New York Times or whatever, when you break it down, they're usually misleading you about what the actual practice of the Chinese has been. So this is, to call the Chinese, to say that they are guilty of debt trap diplomacy is really quite rich.
If you had African leaders in African countries that was complaining, then I'm like, yeah, you guys obviously know what side I'm going to side with. But I showed you guys the poll earlier how young Africans prefer doing business with China over a wide margin over the United States. So we listened to what they were saying. You had African leaders lecturing Anthony Blinken, how are you going to tell us what side we should take on Russia, Ukraine, based on considering how you guys treat us? You guys want us to take your guys' side on Taiwan after how you guys treat us? It makes sense, right? So that's what at least how I at least get the base point. Then you look into this stuff, you read through the propaganda, and it's obvious the United States at least is the empire to have the worst intentions for these people. I want to read this comment because this is a good factual comment by Lewis. I'm sorry I missed a lot of the comments. Keep it coming, guys. There's a lot of great factual comments in here. I love our community. I'm also having a call-in. I'm just trying to do this more often just because I didn't have time to do a lot of call-in shows this month. So I want to do a call-in after this show so I can take some calls from you guys. We can discuss student loans and the Ukraine story we're going to get into here soon. So I have the link to that in the description box. So if you guys want to join me for a discussion after this, I will look forward to hearing you guys. We can have a discussion where you guys can tell your story about student debt. I can probably keep my personal stories on Callin, right? So let's read the chat. Thank you for this comment. By the end of 2019, the debt has risen to 23.2 trillion. Jesus. But so that's a number I can read, but my mind don't really wrap my head. Like, how can you wrap your head around that amount of money, to be honest? But anyway, as of December 31st, 2020, the national debt has jumped to 27.75 trillion, up 39%. They are waging an active class war. So this I am losing my patience when I see these people arguing on behalf of the capitalists. I pay my student loan debt off. Why should they pay? Who are you arguing for? You are protecting the profits of who? Like, it's so ridiculous. You arguing on behalf of the bourgeoisie, thinking that you being a populist. Let's be clear. If you arguing any way, shape, or form for this debt trap of the working class, you cannot call yourself a populist. End of story. End of story. There's no debate on that. I actually want to take this time because we got enough 15 minutes. I want to keep this an hour just because we're going to jump on Callin after that. You're welcome to join as well. I don't know how you're doing on time, Aaron. But I love talking to – I actually enjoy doing Callin more than YouTube, believe it or not, because I like talking to the people who watch the show. So let's get into the main story. We're 45 minutes in. And I wanted to cover that first because look at the difference. Like Biden and the Democratic Party giving people scraps because – they know midterms is coming up, right? Yeah. And now they gave 60 billion overall in aid to Ukraine. That will solve the homeless crisis by a large margin. I guess maybe it'd be the same once you add inflation, because I know that was an older study. But the amount of money they sent to Ukraine, let's just say it will significantly help the poor and working class in this country. Let's just say that, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the homeless, the situation with the housing in the United States. I mean, recently the Chinese said we're going to crack down on profiteering in housing, education, and healthcare, right? And so the Chinese government, central government, said they're going to do that. Well, our central government is not saying that. Who really is our central government when it comes to economic matters? Probably the Federal Reserve and the three capital firms that own pretty much everything. Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, right? They have, if you add up their combined assets that they manage, they have a controlling interest in pretty much every industry in the United States. And then the people that own the individual stocks are like this class of super wealthy people, and they don't have an interest in solving these problems like that. The housing situation, we have the capacity to build more than enough housing, and then we could also tax rent in a particular way so that you didn't have these giant rentier interests who were making housing prices so high. The economist Michael Hudson explains this stuff very well, but basically a house is valued at whatever a bank can loan out for it. That's really what determines the value of a house, is like what the different bids will be, and those are based on how much banks will loan out. And when they loan that money out, it's created out of thin air. It's not that they take some group of people's deposits and actually loan that money out. And so if you don't pay it back, like those people are out. It's like the banks only have to keep a little bit of money on hand, and they can actually create money out of thin air. They're licensed to do that. That's the way this whole system works. And that's why these prices get jacked up so high in an unrealistic way. They could restructure housing policy to just build houses. Okay, this would be the most logical thing to do, to build affordable housing for people, and then that housing prices would fall that way, and that would have a great effect in terms of making every employer's job easier. Like these things like healthcare and education and housing, if you reduce those costs, you reduce the costs of employers to employ anyone. So then you have to ask, well, wait, why aren't employers for this kind of a thing? And that's where it really does get to the tippy top of the oligarchy, where it is like they actually think about it, and the costs of like to their hegemony of like people not having to be so indebted all the time is too destabilizing for them. So they would rather have this very inefficient system that in no way allows the economic potential of the United States to be unleashed, because unleashing it would allow the vast majority of the population to enjoy a lot of the security and freedom that now is only enjoyed by the sort of propertied people that kind of rule everything. I mean, we could all be living without fear of medical crises, besides the medical problems themselves, at least the healthcare and money part wouldn't like be this terrifying thing. Ditto for like housing situations and for student loan issues. These things could all be fixed, and it would greatly improve America's economic competitiveness because it would make it much easier to hire American workers. Any small business owner understands that you have to pay people more in America because everything is kind of expensive. This is a big part of why it's so attractive to hire people in other countries, where either they're so poor that they can be hired that way, or they have better social infrastructure so that the employers don't have to fit the bill for every single thing. But they don't choose to do this. They choose to go a different route for, I think, social engineering purposes to create these massive rackets that not only serve as rackets to make money for the people in housing and healthcare and such, but also to keep the population disciplined and kind of desperate and more easily exploited.
That's why whenever I listen to these people who are right-wing libertarians, they call themselves right-wing populists, and I see them complaining about student loan debt. When they complain about housing, your explanation was on point. It's brilliant. I keep asking, who are you arguing for? Are you a populist or not? Are you arguing for the working class or not? Are you arguing for real estate developers? You arguing for the profits of landlords in Wall Street? These people think they are anti-establishment. They're like, oh my God, George Soros hates us. No, he loves you guys. You guys advocate for policy that will increase their wealth. You guys advocate for policy that will increase the wealth and the power of Goldman Sachs. You guys are advocating for policy that will create masters, servants, and we pretty much have it now, but you guys want to embolden it even more. That is what, when you argue against free housing, you're just arguing for a master-servant system. We, as the people, as the proletariat, as the people who fuel this society, we are the people who make up the flag. If you're a patriot, if you believe in that kind of thing, that flag is us. What the fuck is these resources supposed to go other than us? You guys like, no, I want that real estate developer to make a lot of money. Them people, we can have a ton of homeless people. We can have more crime that leads to because of the poverty that you endorse. But I can write about this all day. Let's get back to the story, because you had a lot of great detail. It makes it easy to riff on. But let's get back to the story while we have time. But you can feel free to chime in with anything you want. Go ahead.
Right. Well, the Ukraine business is, I think that I don't understand where they think they are going with this. I don't see how you can reverse the tide in Ukraine without starting a nuclear war that will kill everyone. A negotiated solution seems like the obvious answer. The longer this goes on, the more the U.S. Prestige, whatever is left of it, is vanishing. I think it's vanishing before our eyes. I mean, this entire discussion on Ukraine, as the mainstream media has had it, really since 2014, has been one long, dumb, covert operation that has been exposed for anybody paying attention. And yet it's like really the naked emperor kind of a thing. It's like, if you want to be a person if you want to be a person in the media or a serious commentator, then you have to pretend that like the coup in 2014 didn't happen. Yeah. Because if you actually talk about it, then none of these other arguments make any sense. You can't talk about the sovereignty of Ukraine when it's not a sovereign state, because it's ruled by a puppet regime. And so at this point, and if you talk about it honestly, then you have to say, like, what would the U.S. do if Russia attempted something in Mexico? Would we tolerate that? Everybody knows absolutely not. They know about the Cuban Missile Crisis, because that's more or less the same thing.
How dare you humanize a country that U.S. view as hostile? Like, I'll just bring up like the historical context. Like, guys, just think about Russians. The average Russian knows someone whose grandparent was probably killed by Nazis.
No, I was there for Victory Day parade in like 2014 maybe with Professor Peter Kuznick, and it was an amazing turnout. A huge number of people came out, and everybody had pictures. They were carrying pictures on like sort of poster signs of grandparents that had died. 27 million people died fighting in World War II for the Soviets. The U.S. lost about 200,000 people. Okay, so we always say 27 million people died. It's really 26.6 million Soviets died. The U.S. lost 400,000, which means that the actual U.S. losses in World War II were the rounding error for the Soviet Union's losses. Okay, 400,000. You cannot imagine what that country went through fighting these invaders from the West. And so the Ukraine thing has to be taken into account, how the Russians perceive that. And Americans know that. It's in WikiLeaks. The CIA director back in 2008 said, like, everybody in the Russia that you talk to, not just Putin, not just right-wingers, all of them see Ukraine as a red line and a terrible threat to Russian sovereignty.
I was going to say that's why Putin has a great approval rating in Russia, because they don't have they got the context. You got the Nazis and that million count is so crazy. Like, guys, do you know that's not a long time ago? Like, literally, people are still alive that can recount and know people who die in Russia today. Then you go back further before that, you got Napoleon, who and you can go further back, even though, but let's stop there. So that's literally, you got less than 100 years ago, you got the Nazi that pillaged them. Then 100 years before that, you got Napoleon, the Napoleon Wars that killed countless amount of ethnic Russians.
And the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War also, I think that you have to go back and look at these. And I must confess that I haven't spent a whole lot of time looking at the coups and so on in the very last days of the Soviet Union, the exact details of it. But in the bigger picture, the U.S. was trying to weaken the Soviet Union. And among other things, they collapsed the price of oil to almost zero right when the Soviet Union collapsed, because Gorbachev wanted to be a reformer. And one of the things Gorbachev was talking about doing at the end there was to restructure the entire relationship with the third world, the formerly colonized world. You know, third world, like the second world is the Soviet-aligned countries, and the first world is the colonizing countries in the third world. And this was a term like Sukarno really used. Some people want to quibble about this, but let's just say he wanted to wipe out third world debt and really allow these countries to develop, and the U.S. wasn't going to go that route. Allende in 1973, when he was overthrown, he had been talking about exorbitant profits and saying that he wasn't going to pay off the debt to the bank, to the financiers anymore, because Western countries had made such ridiculous profits on things like copper in Chile, like having like 80% profit margins over, years and years and years, and that they're going to take that out and they're going to subtract it from the debt. So these issues are all related to the U.S. empire and Russia. After the fall of the Soviet Union, U.S. financial elements basically came in and launched this economic attack, shock therapy, and plunder the economy. That's why you have the oligarchs in Russia that Putin has curtailed somewhat. But they were the worst years for the Russians, the most miserable, horrible years where they suffered huge declines in life expectancy and so on, were after the fall of the Soviet Union, after the U.S. imposed the shock therapy, neoliberal privatization regime onto the Russians, and it created this mobbed up class of oligarchs that really screwed Russia politically for a while until Putin came along. And Putin came and really has been someone who is a nationalist, meaning that he wants what's best for Russia and the Russian people. He has greatly increased life expectancy and other issues. I mean, I'm a socialist, so I think he should have just nationalized the oligarchs outright, all of them, all of their holdings. But like, whatever, it's not my business. I'm an American, and by now it's ingrained in me that I'm not supposed to criticize the targets of American imperialism. So, but the point is, the U.S. has not, the war against Russia did not end with the Cold War. The Cold War didn't need to happen in the first place. And then the end of the Cold War was the U.S. and Russia were never allied. The U.S. was trying to screw them, even as they were pretending to be their friends. And the Russians have woken up to this reality. And if they didn't know it before this invasion started, I think that the liberals in Russia now it's even more obvious, like what the U.S. has been about as far as their relations to Russia go.
So much great information, and people will get us. There's so many Ukraine flag waving fucking fascists who get upset when you just bring up these historical facts. When people unprovoked invasion, there's no reason Russia can do this. Look at the history and the trauma on these people, and you see hostile military alliances building up on the border, propping up and arming Nazis, the people that just killed the previous generation in the millions. You guys don't understand why they would do this? Now, as a peace advocate, I wish there was another way. I'm open to hear other suggestions. But as someone who lived in the U.S. Imperial Corps, my main focus will be on the people who escalated this in the first place, and the people I can hold accountable, the United States and NATO. I don't understand.
And why did they do it? Why did they put that guy in 2014? The answer is to threaten Russian security, to be able to threaten Russia. It's so obvious. And so this is like, for them to say it's unprovoked is the most absurd lie, because there's no other way to explain why they staged the coup in 2014, which is on tape. We have Victoria Nuland and the ambassador talking about it, about who they're going to put in, etc. And additionally, you have that same woman, Victoria Nuland. There's another YouTube clip of her from like a couple years earlier where she's talking about the $5 billion that they put into helping Ukrainian civil society. So even when you think about the protests, which I'm sure there were people protesting for legitimate reasons around the time of the coup, and then the Nazi snipers came in and with CIA help and, you know, helped to orchestrate the coup de grace to the other government. But even when you think about those protests, what kind of influence did the $5 billion for organizing have even on that? Like, you can't organize anything in the United States in a progressive direction and have that kind of money at all. You know, I mean, it's just, it's so clear that it was U.S. manipulation all around. And the result was that for 8 years, I think Putin bided his time, wanted a diplomatic solution to it if possible, and then eventually decided that it wasn't forthcoming. So you can, whether that's how much we want to condemn him or not, it's this. I mean, in the great power politics and in the real world, this was warned about by people like Mearsheimer, and Putin seems to be pursuing what he and others believe is the national interest of Russia. And I don't think that it's a ludicrous kind of position they have, especially when right before the invasion, you had Zelensky in, I believe it was Munich, talking about how maybe they should think about getting nukes. And what is this? How is this going to be received by Russia? It's the most predictable thing in the world, to the extent that you kind of wonder. I mean, I wonder, were they intentionally wanting to provoke this invasion, thinking that these sanctions and the reaction from the international community would be really damaging to Russia? If so, it hasn't played out the way that they thought, and it's hard to believe they could be that stupid. And yet, I do feel like this is a system that so rewards conformity to the empire that we may have gotten to a point of real, like a dynastic decline sort of a thing, where it's like only people who believe in these really dumb things can even rise in the hierarchies of the state. And so now we've just got like the opposite of a meritocracy. We've got a demeritocracy ruled by the worst people outright. And this seems to be what we're saddled with. And I don't know how they're going to extricate themselves. It's exciting in a way and frightening, because the empire is just being exposed to everyone. And I've spent a lot of time, you know, writing a dissertation on it and a book on it and doing a podcast on it and other things. And so it's like most of the things that I've been writing about are sort of being confirmed in different ways that are, it's both heartening and disturbing, because it's not a cheerful scenario or history that I've laid out here.
Yeah, man, it's good to have this conversation. There's so much we can continue to talk about. I'm going to continue the show on Callin. I appreciate everyone for watching. I want to give you another opportunity to plug your podcast, what any books that you've been working on, any recent releases, and you also can add anything else you want to add on top of, like a final word as well. And guys, by the way, the link in the description, and we had a lot of talks about this. Like, we really going to spend a lot as a real RBN network. So we have JB and Savvy show. They coming on. That's going to be in 2 hours. That's 6 p.m. Eastern time. You know, they do their show every Thursday. So I'm going to jump on call, and we're going to have we can have like a 30, 45-minute discussion. I want to hear what you guys take on student loan crisis is. And I want to I still got a few more things stories I want to go over. But I think you guys enjoy like these 1 hour discussions. And I love bringing on anti-imperialist journalists and people who are so knowledgeable about history and the crimes of the empire, like Aaron. So it was great talking to you. Any final words? And please plug anything you wish as well.
Well, I run the American Exception podcast on Patreon. There's a number of free episodes out there, and there's also some subscriber-only ones. So check that out. And the book is American Exception, Empire, and the Deep State. It was my PhD dissertation, political science, but it's not normal political science. Really, it's so radical that I haven't really tried to get a tenure job or anything. I just thought I'm just going to publish this book and do a podcast. So you can find me there, AmericanException.com. We also put some articles out, and we're going to have more out. So that's another place. And you can also follow me on Twitter. And I don't have any master plan for trying to confront all of these forces. In some ways, I think that the international system is going to open opportunities up that we just can't foresee. And we just have to be educated and try to organize in whatever ways we can. And whenever there's a chance to get a union established somewhere or get somebody decent elected, if that's even possible in some cases, I think all the little things that people can do are worth doing when you have some goals that are actually attainable. These are important. And mostly just for people to keep following and listening to voices like yours. And hopefully when the time comes and the change has to be made, we're going to have something positive and not a more open kind of fascism, because that would suck even more than what we have now.
Well said, Aaron. Once again, make sure you guys check out his book, and make sure you guys check out the link in the description. We're gonna jump on. I'll take some calls, and I'm gonna go over the last few stories I have regarding the Ukraine story. So make sure you guys tune in for that. We got a lot of great content coming your way. Also, JB and Savvy Show will be on at 6 p.m. Eastern time. They always have a great time watching that show. We talk about a lot of depressing shit on my show. Their show is a lot more lighthearted, but they also get into a lot of great intellectual theory as well. So it's a great show. Savvy's killing the game. JB's killing the game. Make sure you like, subscribe. And we also have our Patreon link as well if you guys want to show solidarity, help our network grow. We got a lot of great programs with RBN chapters, expanding the network. Like, we got a lot of great announcements that we're going to announce here soon in terms of like how we're going to expand. So any support would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Aaron, for joining us once again. I'll see you guys on Callin. Have a good day, guys. Peace out.